Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap this episode up, can the Cleveland Browns make it to the postseason with Jacoby Brissett as their starting quarterback? Now, right now, we don't know what's going on with this Deshaun Watson situation. Is he going to be suspended for the whole entire year? Is he going to be suspended for a couple of games? Maybe be able to return at some point during the year? But I have yet to see anybody really talk about how good the Browns potentially could be if Jacoby Brissett has to be the starter. So many people think that the Browns, if Deshaun Watson can't play this year, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. I disagree with that. And remind you that this is coming from a objective, unbiased Pittsburgh Steelers fan. The Browns did a really good job of building up this team, right? I know a lot of people are going to harp on them for the Deshaun Watson situation, but outside of that, they re-signed some of their core players. Denzel Ward is under contract. Myles Garrett is under contract. And the majority of your best players on your roster are all on rookie deals. So by looking at this team from a talent standpoint, this is still one of the most talented teams in the NFL minus quarterback. You have a really good offensive line. Your defense is really talented. So for the Browns offensively, I don't really think their offense is going to change that much from last season or the season prior. Now, with Deshaun Watson, Kevin Stefanski probably was going to get a little bit more creative. He probably was going to implement a couple of new things, new wrinkles. But with Jacoby Brissett, if he ends up having to start the whole entire season for the Cleveland Browns, or if he even has to keep them afloat for a good duration of the season until Deshaun Watson potentially could return, depending on the length of his suspension, I think that he's going to be able to keep them afloat. Because you guys got to remember that Kevin Stefanski keeps things simple. He wants to run the football down your throat until you prove you can stop it. So for Cleveland, even though you don't have Deshaun Watson, you have Jacoby Brissett, who is more than capable of being able to keep you afloat. Okay, he has been a starter in the past. He started for Indianapolis in 2017, 2019, when Andrew Luck decided to abruptly retire. 2019 is probably his best year, and the Colts went 7-8 when he was the starter. He, during that season, completed 60% of his passes, threw 18 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, and threw for 2,942 passing yards. And he also went 2-3 when he was starting for the Dolphins in replace of Tua when he was out with his injury. So this is somebody who is good enough to keep you in games. But really, for Cleveland, you're going to have to lean on that run game, and you're going to have to rely on your defense. Your defense is going to have to play at a top 5, almost top 10 level. You remember how the Steelers defense played during 2019 when Big Ben got injured? That's kind of the season that the Browns got to have. The Browns got to have a season where this defense comes in and they just end up dominating opponents. And they definitely have the talent to do so. You have Myles Garrett. You re-signed Jadeveon Clowney, who is coming off a bounce-back year where he had 9 sacks, a quiet 9 sacks. Not too many people know how good Jadeveon Clowney was last season. You have arguably the best secondary in the NFL, Denzel Ward. You have John Johnson at safety. You got Grant Delpit, Greedy Williams, Greg Newsome at corner. Like, this Browns defense is stacked. Your only concern probably is the linebacker position outside of JOK. So for Cleveland, this team should be able to stay afloat because their schedule, believe it or not, is not all that tough. Your first couple of games of the seasons should be pretty winnable. You have Carolina on the road. You have to face the New York Jets. So those are 2 games that you should be able to win. You should be able to go 2-0 before you face Pittsburgh. But you do play them on a short week. However, you do play them at home. Then after that, you go on the road, play the Falcons. So there's a good chance that the Browns, without Deshaun Watson potentially, with Jacoby Brissett at the helm, could start the season out either 3-1 or 4-0 if they end up doing what they are supposed to do and not losing the teams that they have no business losing to. I like the Jets. They're definitely going to be way better than what they were last season, but this is a young team, and the Browns pretty much have a Super Bowl caliber roster that is a quarterback away from getting there. So Then you play the Chargers, you play New England, and this is really where things start to heat up for the Browns. Now, let's do worst case scenario, right? Let's say Cleveland ends up dropping the game to Carolina or Pittsburgh, right? And let's say they go into that Chargers matchup 2-2. Okay, now things look a little bit dicey. But if things go how they should, and you end up going 3-1, 4-0 into that Chargers matchup, you're in a pretty good spot. Because then you got a little bit more room for error. So your next 4 games, Chargers, Patriots, however, you are playing them both at home. So if you could split and win at least one of those matchups, you're in a good spot. Because then at that point, you're either at 5 wins or you're at 4 wins. And then you play your 2 other divisional foes, the Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals, before you have your bye week early in November. So for the Browns, I mean, if you can be at 5, 6 wins at this point, you're in a really good spot. Then you have to play the Dolphins, which is a game that could be pretty tough. Then you play Buffalo. So now you're starting to play some of the better teams in the NFL. And the Browns could end up getting into a really tough stretch during this season. But then the schedule kind of calms down a little bit. You play the Houston Texans on the road in Houston. Then you get to play Cincinnati again. And I definitely think that despite the fact that Cincinnati's offense is going to be fantastic this year, your defense does match up pretty well with Cincinnati's offense on paper. So you should be able to kind of slow them down a little bit compared to the majority of teams that play Cincinnati. Then you play the Ravens again. I don't think the Ravens offense is going to be all that fantastic, simply for the fact that we just don't know how much the passing game is going to improve this season under offensive coordinator Greg Roman. So I definitely think that that's one reason why I think the Browns can end up splitting with the Baltimore Ravens, regardless if Deshaun plays or if he doesn't play. Then you play New Orleans, which New Orleans is going to be a pretty tough team. But then you play Washington and Pittsburgh to close out the season. Both of those 2 games are going to be on the road. So I definitely think that the Browns can pull off 8 wins this season without Deshaun Watson. Now, is 8 wins good enough to get you into the postseason? Definitely not, considering how tough the AFC is going to be. However, best case scenario, right, since you do have a pretty favorable schedule to start the season off, you know, you could possibly be undefeated going into that Chargers matchup. And then if you can at least split all your divisional games, then that's probably, 2 extra wins? So that's 6 wins there. Then you just have to be able to find a way to, you know, survive the second half of your schedule. You got to be able to beat Buffalo or Tampa Bay. You got to be able to win one of those 2 games. And you also probably have to make sure that you can take care of Washington. So you can do that. You can find yourself around 9, maybe 10 wins. And then if you get to 9 wins, then you're definitely in that conversation for that 7th seed. And then if you're at 10 wins, then you're definitely going to be closer to a sure thing to getting into the postseason. Now, 10 wins might not be good enough to get a team into the playoffs this year with how tough everything is going to be in this conference. But overall, I think Cleveland, with the fact that they have such a great supporting cast around Jacoby Brissett, they have a great offensive line. You got Amari Cooper. You have Donovan Peoples-Jones. You also have a really good group of running backs. I think that Kevin Stefanski's offense is going to be simple. It's going to be ground and pound. They're going to want to control the time of possession, rely on their defense, and I think that still is a winning formula for Cleveland to get into the playoffs. Because really, even if you have a great team, as long as you have an okay coach, you should be good enough to get into the postseason. And Mike Tomlin, if he was able to make it to the playoffs with what the Steelers had to work with last season, it's no reason why Cleveland couldn't potentially pull off the same thing. So let me know how you guys feel about the Cleveland Browns playoff chances with Jacoby Brissett. Can the Browns make it in? I think that there is a better possibility of them getting in than what many people are giving them credit for. Many people are just under this assumption that the Browns are just this dumpster fire if they don't have Deshaun Watson play this year. But they have Jacoby Brissett, and they have a really good roster around them. So if they rely on their defense and they can control time possession, I think that they have a really good chance. Now, I don't think it will happen, But I definitely think that it's a better chance of happening than what people give it credit for, if you guys get my drift. But I appreciate you guys for listening to this episode of the podcast. Remember that the JT Sports Podcast is available on every single podcasting platform: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts. Wherever you get your podcast from, the JT Sports Podcast is available. And I will see you guys with another episode shortly.